Tonight, the opposition's Istanbul Mayor Ekrem Imamoğlu has been banned from holding political office. We'll see what AKP supporters have to say about it. Edgar Şar will be with us to make sense of it all, and a chilling story of unspeakable child abuse in a religious Tariqa. I am Murat Türsan, and this is This Week in Turkey. Our main story tonight, main opposition party CHP's Istanbul mayor has just been convicted to 2 years and 7 months in prison. Although due to the esoteric nature of the Turkish judicial system, he's unlikely to see the inside of a jail cell unless he's found to have committed some other offense during that time. But that's not the story. The real story is he is banned from politics. A little refresher. Ekrem Imamoğlu is from CHP, the biggest opposition party in Turkey. And in 2019, he did something no one had done since the 90s. He won Istanbul. Istanbul is Erdoğan's old stomping grounds. It's his home turf. But more than that, Erdoğan used to be Istanbul's mayor. And apparently history is in fact cyclical. Because after Erdoğan took office back in 94, he was unceremoniously prosecuted for reciting a poem that the former secularist government argued incited an Islamist revolution. Erdoğan was stripped of his rank, banned from politics, and imprisoned. When AKP took power in 2001, they removed his lifetime ban from politics, and the rest is history. So, it's looking like Imamoğlu is currently walking a mile in Erdoğan's shoes, though his crime, frankly, is comical. He's convicted of calling government officials fools. See, Minister of Interior Süleyman Soylu once upon a time called Imamoğlu an ahmak, which means fool, idiot, knucklehead, whatever. It's not a nice thing to call somebody, but it's not exactly George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on TV either. So, Imamoğlu strikes back and says, I'm not the fool, the High Election Council are the fools. This is happening right after the High Election Council tried to throw out the election where he had won. And while Süleyman Soylu goes on his merry way unscathed, Imamoğlu gets the book thrown at him. Was this an independent judicial decision? Well, who are we to say? Turkey isn't exactly known for being a haven of independence of the judiciary from the government. So if this verdict wasn't politically motivated to take Imamoğlu out, it sure is looking a lot like it. But why take him out? Well, we're not pointing any fingers here, but Imamoğlu is a very, very popular potential candidate. In CHP, he's one of the 3 most likely candidates to run against Erdoğan, and according to the polls, he's got a shot. A very, very good shot. According to poll aggregates, Imamoğlu beats Erdoğan in 23 out of 30 polls. That's a 76% likelihood to win, folks. 76. You don't need me to tell you that those are some pretty good odds for the mayor. But unfortunately, he's out of the running. Or is he? Because today, AKP is doing a little bit of damage control. Minister of Interior, Süleyman Soylu, yes, him, came out and said that this is still an ongoing process and it's not set in stone for now and the decision can be overturned. What's going to happen from this point forward is anybody's guess. But that's enough out of me. Let's go to the details.
The mayor of Turkey's largest city, Istanbul, has been sentenced to a 2-year prison sentence and a lifetime political ban. Though he is expected to get away with time served unless convicted of another offense, Mayor Ekrem Imamoğlu, one of the potential presidential hopefuls in next year's election, is currently eliminated from the running. But what exactly landed Imamoğlu in this predicament? Imamoğlu has been convicted on charges of insulting public officials. The High Election Council of Turkey sued Imamoğlu for calling them fools after the 2019 Istanbul mayoral election. In 2019, the ballots cast at the Istanbul mayoral election were annulled and thrown out by the authorities when Imamoğlu secured a narrow victory against AKP candidate Binali Yıldırım. Elections were redone in June, handing Imamoğlu a firm near 10-point victory the second time. But not before Imamoğlu filed a complaint with the European Parliament for election fraud. In response, the Minister of Interior Süleyman Soylu called Imamoğlu a fool for doing so. When Imamoğlu responded by saying the true fools are the election council, he was prosecuted. Imamoğlu was the first mayor in over 20 years to win Istanbul, ousting President Erdoğan's AKP. The conventional wisdom in Turkey indicates whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey, as Istanbul, with its diverse population, is considered the best representative sample for the country. Thousands of supporters rallied as the hearing took place in Istanbul. Supporters chanted slogans, brandished Turkish flags under heavy police presence. Many called for the resignation of President Erdoğan and Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu. Many believe that the decision was wholly politically motivated, with the aim of eliminating one of the greatest potential threats to Erdoğan at the ballot box in next year's election. After the verdict was announced, Mayor Ekrem Imamoğlu called his supporters to gather in front of the city hall where he held a rally.
Sizden söz almak istiyorum. 2023'te her şey
Imamoğlu's party boss, CHP chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, released a video soon after saying,
"We are witnessing a massacre of law and order. We are witnessing people whose hearts and minds are for rent. Curse your usurping authoritarian mentality. But there is something you're forgetting. No CHP member will cover or yield to bullies. You will see, you will learn."
The opposition's two leaders and coalition partner Meral Akşener arrived on scene soon after, with Kılıçdaroğlu arriving from Germany. Soon after, all heads of the opposition coalition's 6 parties descended on City Hall.
If the nation votes in their favor, they have no problem with it whatsoever. But if there's another decision, if it turns out a different way, then the problems start. They do everything in their power to suppress the will of the people. But let them. It is for naught. It means nothing.
And before we move on to Edgar for analysis, we've got a little treat for you. Medyascope reporter Ali Deniz Çakır went down to Erdoğan's neighborhood of Kasımpaşa. If there ever was an AKP stronghold, that's Kasımpaşa. The president literally grew up there, and Kasımpaşa hasn't forgotten because that district handily goes to AKP every single time. Well, what do people of Kasımpaşa have to say about this decision? Let's watch.
Istanbul Mayor Ekrem Imamoğlu has been banned from public office. We are here in Kasımpaşa district, an AKP stronghold. We are going to be asking residents what they think about this verdict that many are calling highly political.
Bu 20 milyona hakaret ya. Yani 16 milyona hakaret ya. Başka ne söylenebilir ki? Yani tek kelimeyle adamın önünü kesmek. Olmaz bu kadar ya. Bu saçmalık. Ben şuradan bir fırından ekmek aldım. Fırın AK Partili bunlar. Ne söylüyorlar biliyor musun? AK Parti kendi ayağına kurşun sıktı diyor. Zaten daha önceden planlanmış bir şeydi. Almanya'ya gitme meselesi. Ondan sonra ama döndü. Türkiye'ye dönmek zorunda da kaldı. Tayyip Erdoğan kendi yıllar önce kendisinin aynı düştüğü konuma şeyi düşürdü. İmamoğlu'nu düşürdü.
Ekrem Bey'in belediye başkanlığında çok başarısız olduğunu görüyoruz. Şimdi hedefi Cumhurbaşkanı olmakmış. Cumhurbaşkanlığı olmak için ne çapını ne yapısını uygun buluyorum. Allah sonuna hayır getirsin. Giriştiği işte gene yolda kalacak. Milleti yolda bırakmasın, bize o yeter. Komedidir. Onun yaptığı şeyler, hanımefendinin, Meral ablamın koşarak onun yanına koşması. Derdi nedir bilmiyorum ama herhalde Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu'nu yıkmaya çalışıyor Meral Hanım. Başka şey göremiyoruz biz. Hakim kararı vermiştir. Yargıtay'a gönderirsin. Danıştay'a gider. Nereye gidiyorsa. Oradan çıkana bakarsın. Çıkıp da oralarda şov yapmanın bir anlamı yoktur. Yani katılmıyorum tabii ki. Mağduriyet diye bir şey yok. Şu anda hiçbir şey yok ki ortada. Hele bir sonuç gelsin. Sonuç yok. Mahkeme kararını vermiş. Gidersin davanı açarsın. Dersin ki ben buna itiraz ediyorum. Hemen çıkıp ben geliyorum işte öbürü geldi kurtaracağız falan. Komik. Komik.
Yani bence bunu en iyi Tayyip Erdoğan'ın anlaması lazım. Yani kendi uğradığı haksızlığa ya bir başkasının uğramasına bence kendi kabul etmemesi lazım. Siyasidir bence. Verilen hak geri alınmaz. Ne oldu? İlk seçimi yeniden seçim yaptılar. 800 bin oyla geri geldi. Yani burada aynı şey tepki oyu yapar. Nasıl Tayyip Erdoğan yani haksızlığa uğradı, birden tek başına iktidara geldi. Yani haksızlığa, bizim milletimiz haksızlığa uğrayanın yanında olur yani.
Yargı Erdoğan'ın güdümünde diyenlere aslında dün verilen bu karar çok güzel bir cevaptı. Siyaseten bitmiş bir siyasiyi yani Ekrem İmamoğlu'na Tayyip Erdoğan böyle bir karar alır prim yapmazdı herhalde. Demek ki bu yargı Tayyip Erdoğan'ın güdümünde ve tek elinde değil. Zaten dünkü kararla onlar Cumhurbaşkanı adayını açıkladılar bence. İYİ Parti ile beraber Ekrem İmamoğlu Cumhurbaşkanı kararını açıkladılar.
Joining me now from Berlin, Medyascope's very own political extraordinaire, Edgar Şar. Edgar, always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me, Murat.
My pleasure. Edgar, let's start with this. Is this a done deal? The verdict still has to be upheld by the higher courts, and Imamoğlu can still appeal the decision. It's funny that I talk for a living and I can't do it. After the decision was handed down, Imamoğlu held a rally and came out really strong and defiant. He did mention the 2023 elections a lot, which prompted a lot of people to say that AKP just picked the opposition's candidate for them. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the calculations made by the ruling bloc, including President Erdoğan, go far beyond the next presidential elections when they forced the court to make such a ruling about Mr. Imamoğlu. Of course, these calculations concern the presidential elections as well. But I think regardless of these upcoming general elections, I think governing Istanbul once again is also something that they aim at while giving this ruling. Because as much as the current ruling bloc has a shot at winning the general elections next year, I think all the research that has been made show that the chances of the current ruling bloc to recapture Istanbul in the upcoming local elections is close to zero. So I think as long as this ruling bloc is there to compete with the opposition to govern Istanbul, I think they will not be able to get this chance once again. So, considering also the fact that this may also be the last time that they have a majority in the municipal assembly, I think it's a very important chance for AK Party to recapture Istanbul's governance before, Imamoğlu runs once again in the local elections in 2024. So this is one of the reasons, I think, why they enforce the court to give such a ruling. But on the other hand, of course, presidential elections is also one of the factors that we have to take into consideration while evaluating this decision, because probably the ruling bloc must have calculated that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu would be the probable candidate after, Imamoğlu's chances are legally dead with this decision. However, it would be very difficult for them to calculate that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu would be in Berlin by the time that the verdict was given. So that was also a factor that we have to take into consideration while evaluating if Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy became a stronger possibility after all that happened. On the other hand, we see also another factor, because the table of 6 opposition parties have had so far difficulties picking their candidate, and the main fault line on the in the table is Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's candidacy. So with Imamoğlu, who is now more popular, and with Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, whose popularity decreased because he was Berlin specifically, we cannot conclude that, after this court ruling, the picture on the candidacy issue is becoming clearer for the table of 6 opposition parties. But just on the contrary, it has become even more difficult for them. But maybe what we can expect them to do is to accelerate the process and to discuss the issue as soon as possible. Maybe as early as earlier than they had already decided. So this may be the only effect of that ruling on the candidacy issue. So at the end, I'm not sure if we can say that the opposition is now in a better position as far as the presidential elections are concerned. But on the other hand, with Imamoğlu's increasing popularity, and also with the opportunity used by the opposition to get consolidated after the ruling, made the opposition also a stronger candidate in terms of the next presidential elections.
I see. And a little sidebar, Your Honor. You said that it was imperative for, I'm paraphrasing, it was imperative for AKP to recapture Istanbul's governance. Now, AKP's kind of had a vendetta against Imamoğlu in particular since 2019 when they redid the elections. We've talked a little bit about this before, but could you dive into that a little bit more and explain why it appears that to win Istanbul appears as critical as winning Turkey to AKP?
Well, actually, if AKP has been the ruling party for 20 years now, I think having governed Istanbul has played a very significant role. Istanbul's metropolitan municipality is even bigger than the biggest holdings of Turkey combined in terms of the finances that it controls. So governing Istanbul gives you access to a very huge amount of finance, and also having the 1/4 of the entire Turkish population in one city, it's also a very big stage for a political party to show the electorate its capabilities. So, for example, let me just give you an example in which I can draw a scenario where, for example, the current ruling bloc loses the next general elections. So we might very well expect them to fall apart, don't we? So if they govern Istanbul, I think this may give them also the possibility to stay intact, even if they lose the next general elections, because governing Istanbul is itself something that can change the picture in the next processes. So I think winning Istanbul that's why very much important, and that's also the very reason why they cancelled the local elections in Istanbul that was held on 21st March in 2019, and ordered a rerun of the elections that was held in June 2019. So I think once again this ruling proved that Istanbul has been very important to the ruling bloc, and particularly to Prime Minister Erdoğan, where he started, his story, and he knows very well himself that governing Istanbul is a very big step to govern Turkey, and I think he wants to benefit from this opportunity before or after the next general elections.
All right, and Edgar, let's end on this. You talked about this a little bit, but a lot of people are saying that AKP might have actually shot itself on the foot. But let's look at this from an AKP voter bloc perspective. What do you think? Did AKP just strengthen its hand in the upcoming elections, or did it just shoot itself in the foot?
Well, first of all, why do we think that the opposition has a real shot at winning the next general elections? Because AKP's voter base is getting weaker and weaker over time. And recently, of course, we know that this weakening stopped, and the AKP might have even reversed this weakening process a bit, but not as strong as it would, getting a majority requires. However, we know that the AKP's voting bloc, voter base, is also getting affected by the sense of injustice, which was, for example, the case in 2019 that we have just talked about. In the rerun elections, the difference between the votes of the AKP candidate and the CHP candidate, multiplied. Just because, not just because of this reason, but this was one of the reasons why such a big difference happened at the end. So I think in this case we can see just repetition of the same scenario, where a significant amount of voters in the AKP's base, if not the most, thinks that this is a very, very unjust decision that was given by the court as a result of the force by the government. I think they don't have any doubt about that. And they can even sympathize with their own leaders' political story, where, as I said, current President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan started his story in Istanbul as the mayor, and he was dismissed from his mayoral seat because of a court case that was not more funny than the current one. So I think the voter base of Mr. Erdoğan also is aware of what's going on, and it will likely to affect their voting behavior. Not that most of them will give up voting for Mr. Erdoğan, but in such an election that's very much important, that is of a historical importance, I think only a few percentage points matter, as very much as well. So I think from this perspective, this will be a negative effect for them. However, the results will be shot by the opposition itself. How the opposition will decide how this ruling will affect the opposition.
Edgar Şar, thanks for breaking that down, and thanks for coming on. Always appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Murat.
And moving on to domestic news, this is a story on horrifying tales of sexual abuse intertwined with religious orders tied to the government. So folks, viewer discretion is advised. A woman only identified as HGK came forward last week and revealed that she was married at age 6 and sexually assaulted every single day until the age of 14. Her father, a prominent member of the ismailaga Tariqa, married her off to another Tariqa member, and they managed to keep it quiet for years as the child was subjected to untold terrors. But before we get to her heart-wrenching story, let's talk about Tariqas and their government connections. Tariqas are religious orders. They're sort of like independent religious groups, which in Turkey are not officially recognized. Let's keep in mind, the government exercises strict control over religion in Turkey. Imams are government-trained, government-paid employees whose numbers and budgets have seen an explosion over the last 20 years of AKP rule. But alongside its own institution, the government also relies on tariqas to retain votes and power. But this is not free. Famously, AKP had allied itself with the Gülen Foundation, later called the FETÖ terrorist organization. Members of FETÖ, once an ally of the AKP, over time found their ways to the highest levels of government and the military. But when a non-amicable divorce occurred between them, FETÖ attempted to overthrow the government in 2016, and its members were purged. After the era of FETÖ, somebody had to take their place and galvanize the religious conservative vote. Enter the Nakşibandi orders, and enter the Ismailaga Tariqa, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, orders in Turkey. HGK's father was a higher up in the Ismailaga Tariqa. Ismailaga are known for being ultra-Orthodox, from the way they dress to how they adhere to Islamic tenets, and perhaps more notably, their views on women. With hundreds and thousands of followers, this group has had no shortages of scandals. Ismailaga has been in the center of many controversies throughout the years. But the Tariqa is connected. Even President Erdoğan is known for having close ties with the religious organization. As a matter of fact, this June, when the Tariqa's then leader, Mahmut Usta Osmanoğlu, passed away, Erdoğan was front and center at his funeral and gave an emotional eulogy. Well, last week we find out that there has been a legal case against high-ranking members of the Tariqa from HGK who has presented a treasure trove of evidence of unspeakable abuse she suffered for years before she was able to get away. But this is only happening after a previous investigation in the case was dropped in some very, very suspicious circumstances. This case has been ongoing since 2020, and we're only finding out about this chilling nature right now, as HGK came forward to make the case public. We're going to go to that story right now, but again, viewer discretion is advised.
Turkey was rocked last week when journalist Timur Soykan unearthed an investigation that has been ongoing since 2012. A woman identified as HKG filed a suit claiming that she was married off to a 29-year-old Tariqa member at age 6. According to H, she was married off to a member of the Ismailaga Tariqa, a religious Nakşibandi sect in Turkey, thought to be connected to the highest levels of government. According to the suit, H was made to wear a white dress that looked like a wedding gown. Her parents introduced her to her assailant Kadir and said, "He is your husband now." Kadir later took her to a photo studio to take pictures. As she was getting her pictures taken, she thought she was playing house. H says that she was sexually assaulted every day. Her assailant said that it was a game.
Sen benim karımsın, ben senin kocanım. Evliler böyle oyunlar oynar ama bu oyun kimseye söylenmez.
Annem ile babam Kadir'e damadım diyordu.
H thought that her parents were unaware of the nightmare she was in, but Kadir would later tell her that he had her father's approval. H is the daughter of Yusuf Ziya Gümüşel, the founder of Hiranur Foundation, a non-profit under the Ismailaga Tariqa. H and Kadir weren't living together at the time. H's mother, Fatma, was first opposed to the relationship, but her father, Yusuf, would take her to meet Kadir when her mother wasn't home. After a while, her mother also went along with it. She would brush her hair and send H over to Kadir. When H was 13, she became officially engaged to Kadir and had a wedding when she was 14. 4 months after the wedding, H's mother took her to the doctor as she was having irregularities with her period. The doctor worked out that H was being sexually assaulted and called the police. The state prosecutor opened an investigation soon after. H was made to say that she was 17 and married Kadir on her own volition. Her mother was made to memorize and repeat her answers. The prosecution responsible for the case did not obtain a birth certificate for H during the investigation. Instead, H was transferred to a hospital for a bone test to determine her true age. However, through their connections, the Tariqa was able to get a 21-year-old woman to take the test instead. The investigation was later dropped. H did not go to school. She was kept so isolated her whole life that she had no idea the horror she was in was not normal. She one day overheard on the radio that girls as young as 6 should not be married off. She tried to run away, but was stopped by her father.
Bu olaydan sonra tekrar içime kapandım. İtaat etmeye çalıştım, ailemin sözünden çıkmadım. 17 yaşında hamile kaldım. Çocuk doğduktan sonra huzur buldum. Ancak çocuğumu benden aldılar.
When she was 18, she went to see a doctor. The doctor told her that she had been raped every day since she was 6, something that H was only now beginning to understand. H discovered social media and made friends with a woman online. Her friend told her to record her phone conversation with Kadir. After H recorded the call, she filed a suit. She gathered her evidence, pictures, recordings, everything to prove that she was underage. This time, the prosecution obtained a birth certificate for H and confirmed that she was born in 1998. The prosecution is asking for 67 years for Kadir and 22-year sentences for Mother Fatma and Father Yusuf. The prosecutor that dropped the first case in 2012 is currently under investigation.
And with that, that's it for us on This Week in Turkey. I have Murat Türsan. A special thanks to Mehmet Tanverdi for news text and Kathleen Phelps for voiceovers. And a special thanks to you, as per usual, for joining us. Good night.